Hey, sociology droids, ready to geek out a little? Today we are diving deep into a classic Sociology of Science article, perfect for all you grad students out there.
Oh, yeah, this one's a good one.
We're talking about Ian I. Mitroff's Norms and Counternorms in a select group of the Apollo moon scientists.
From way back in 1974.
Published in the American Sociological Review, this article really digs into the nitty-gritty of how science actually happens.
Especially when you're dealing with high-stakes research.
Like the Apollo missions.
Exactly.
So think moon rocks, scientific reputations on the line, and a whole lot of sociological intrigue.
Mitroff spent over 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah, embedded with 42 prominent scientists who were analyzing those moon rocks.
Wow, so he wasn't just like pop in for a quick interview or sending out a survey?
Yeah, no, this was deep immersion. He was observing them, interviewing them, really getting into their heads about how they viewed the scientific process itself.
So we're not just talking about those abstract scientific norms we learn about in textbooks.
Like objectivity, communalism, all that.
Right.
Mitroff wanted to see how those norms actually played out in a real-world, high-pressure environment.
And I'm guessing he found that things weren't quite as neat and tidy as the textbooks might suggest.
So could say that.
So spill the tea. What did Mitroff find?
Well, one of the things that really jumped out was the role of emotion in science.
Emotion. You mean like scientists having feelings?
Exactly. These weren't the purely rational, detached figures you sometimes imagine. These scientists were passionate, sometimes even to a fault, about their ideas.
Okay, so they weren't robots.
Not at all. Mitroff has this amazing quote where one scientist describes a colleague who was so committed to his theory. He said, let me see if I can find the exact quote. Yes, here it is. He said, "You could literally take the moon apart piece by piece, ship it back to Earth, reassemble it in X's backyard, and shove the whole thing, and X would still continue to believe that the moon is Q."
Wow. Okay, that is some serious dedication to a theory. But it also kind of makes you wonder if those scientists were wearing blinders, ignoring any data that didn't fit their worldview.
That's a really good point. And actually, that's one of the questions Mitroff asked them directly. He wanted to know what they thought about this whole idea of the purely objective, emotionless researcher.
Yeah, they say.
Well, they basically laughed in his face.
Seriously. So they were self-aware about their own biases and passions.
Totally. But here's the thing. They didn't see it as a weakness. They actually argued that a certain amount of emotional investment is crucial for scientific progress.
That's fascinating. So like being emotionally invested in your research gives you the fuel to keep going, even when things get tough.
Exactly. One of them even put it this way. Let me see. Without emotional commitment, one wouldn't have the energy, the drive to press forward sometimes against extremely difficult odds.
Okay, I'm starting to see their point. If you're not passionate about your research, are you really going to put in the long hours, the frustrating experiments, the constant setbacks to really make a breakthrough?
They would say no. They'd say that passion is what allows them to chase those big, ambitious questions, even when the answers are elusive.
Okay, this is pretty mind-blowing. So are we saying objectivity goes out the window then?
Not quite. Mitroff calls this sociological ambivalence, the idea that there are these conflicting norms at play within the scientific community.
Okay, explain that.
So on the one hand, you have the traditional norms, like universalism.
Right, the idea that scientific knowledge should be judged on its own merit, no matter who's presenting it.
Exactly. But on the other hand, you have what Mitroff calls counter norms. And one of the big ones he identifies is particularism.
Particularism.
What's that? It's the idea that, yeah, a scientist's background, their reputation, their affiliations, it all matters.
So it's not what you know, it's who you know, even in science.
To some extent, yeah. And here's the thing, the scientists Mitroff interviewed acknowledged that they saw this happening all the time. They knew that certain researchers were given more attention, their findings taken more seriously, just because of who they were.
That's kind of unsettling. Like, it makes you wonder about the power dynamics at play, right? How those relationships might shape what's considered good science.
Absolutely. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Mitroff actually suggests that even secrecy, something that seems completely taboo in the world of open scientific inquiry, might actually function as a counter-norm that contributes to scientific progress.
Wait, secrecy. How could that possibly be a good thing in science?
I know, right? It sounds crazy. But think about it this way. Scientists are under immense pressure to publish their findings first, to get credit for those big discoveries.
Oh yeah, the fear of getting scooped. I can see how that would lead to some secrecy.
Exactly. And Mitroff even quotes scientists talking about how they knew their work was significant because people were literally trying to steal their ideas. It's like academic espionage.
Wow, that is wild. But okay, so are we saying it's okay for scientists to be secretive and biased? I mean, where does that leave us?
That's a great question. And that's exactly what we'll be digging into next time as we continue our deep dive into Mitroff's fascinating research.
Okay, sociology droids, you heard it here first. Science is a lot more complicated than those tidy textbook definitions might suggest.
Buckle up, because we're just getting started.
Stick around to see what other surprising counternorms Mitroff uncovers as we delve deeper into the fascinating world of the Apollo moon scientists. So last time, we were talking about those counternorms that Mitroff uncovered, like secrecy, and how they kind of complicate our understanding of how science works.
Yeah, it's like we're taught that science is all about objectivity and universalism.
Right, where research should be judged solely on its merits, no matter who's doing it.
But then Mitroff comes along and shows us that, well, it's not always that simple.
Exactly, like with particularism.
Ah, yes, particularism, the idea that a scientist's reputation and connections actually matter.
And like who they know can influence how their work is perceived.
Absolutely. It's almost like a hidden currency in science.
And you're saying that Mitroff found actual evidence of this happening among the Apollo moon scientists.
Oh yeah, he gives examples of scientists observing that research coming from certain prestigious labs or from big-name researchers was often given more weight.
Even if the data itself wasn't all that impressive.
Sometimes, yeah, it's like the halo effect, but for science.
So even in science, which prides itself on objectivity, there's still this element of social influence.
Definitely. And then there's the whole secrecy thing.
Which just seems so counterintuitive to the spirit of science.
Right. We're taught that open communication is crucial for scientific progress.
Yeah, like sharing your findings so others can build on them.
But when you're in a competitive field and you think you're on the verge of a major discovery,
You don't want to give your ideas away.
exactly. You don't want to get scooped. Mitroff actually quotes one scientist who said, and I'm paraphrasing here, if you don't want to get scooped, keep your mouth shut.
Wow. Okay, so particularism and secrecy. These are two big counter norms that Mitroff found. What else?
Well, this next one might really throw you for a loop.
Okay, Amy.
Organized dogmatism.
Hold on, dogmatism. Isn't that like the opposite of scientific thinking?
It seems that way, right? We're supposed to be skeptical, question everything, be open to new evidence.
Exactly.
But Mitroff makes this a really compelling argument that a certain amount of organized dogmatism is actually essential for scientific progress.
Listening.
He argues that sometimes you need to have this unwavering belief in your ideas,
Even when everyone else thinks you're wrong.
especially when everyone else thinks you're wrong. It takes a certain level of, well, let's call it intellectual stubbornness to really challenge the status quo.
So it's like the people who make the biggest breakthroughs are often the ones who are willing to go against the grain, to trust their gut, even when the evidence is ambiguous.
Exactly. They have to have that conviction to keep pushing forward, to ignore the naysayers.
And Mitroff found this among the Apollo moon scientists.
Oh, yeah. He actually highlights 3 specific scientists who are known for being incredibly stubborn.
But they were also brilliant, right?
Exactly. They were the ones coming up with the most innovative ideas. One of the scientists Mitroff interviewed said something like, if you don't have the courage of your convictions, you might as well not do science.
So it's almost like you need that dogmatism, that strong inner compass to navigate the uncertainties of research.
Right. Especially when you're exploring uncharted territory. But of course, there's a danger here.
Yeah, like what if you become so attached to your ideas that you ignore evidence to the contrary?
That's the key. It's about finding that balance. You need that conviction to drive you forward, but you also need to be able to critically evaluate your own work and be open to changing your mind.
So it's about having the courage to be wrong.
Absolutely. To admit when you're wrong and adjust your thinking accordingly, that's what separates the true scientists from the, well, let's just say the less rigorous ones.
Okay, so we've got this tension between organized skepticism and organized dogmatism. What other fascinating dynamics did Mitroff uncover?
Well, let's talk about interestedness as a counter-norm.
Interestedness. But isn't the ideal that scientists should be disinterested, like neutral observers detached from the implications of their work?
That's the traditional view, yes.
Yeah.
But Mitroff argues that, in reality, scientists are just as human as anyone else.
Meaning?
Meaning they have their own interests, agendas, pet theories they're passionate about proving.
So it's not just about pure objective curiosity.
Not always. And this interestedness, Mitroff argues, is especially pronounced within what he calls invisible colleges.
Invisible colleges.
These are like informal networks of researchers who share common interests, theoretical frameworks, maybe even methodological approaches.
This is like their own little scientific communities.
Exactly. They share ideas, support each other's work, but it can also create a bit of an echo chamber.
Where alternative viewpoints are shut out.
Potentially, yes. And that can have real consequences for the direction of research.
I can see how funding priorities or political pressures might play a role here.
Absolutely. And this brings up another interesting counter-norm, localism.
Localism, as opposed to universalism.
Right. Mitroff found that scientists, despite their commitment to universal scientific principles, are often very invested in the success of their own institutions, their own research groups, their own countries.
So even in science, there's this sense of tribe or team.
Very much so. And sometimes this sense of localism can actually override the ideal of impartial judgment.
Like you're more likely to support research coming from your own tribe, even if it's not the most groundbreaking.
It's a human tendency, for sure. And Mitroff found evidence of this happening among the Apollo moon scientists.
It makes you wonder if this localism plays a role in the replication crisis some fields are experiencing.
That's a really good point. If everyone's focused on confirming their own findings and the findings of their tribe, it could definitely lead to some blind spots.
So it's like we need to be aware of these counter norms, not to condone them, but to understand how they might subtly influence the scientific process.
Exactly. And to be more critical consumers of research, we need to ask ourselves, who's doing the research? What are their motivations? What are their connections? What are their biases?
Because at the end of the day, scientists are human.
They're not robot.
And science is a lot messier and more complicated than we often think.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just about following a set of rules or applying a method. It's about people, relationships, power dynamics, and all those fascinating social forces that shape the pursuit of knowledge.
All right, Sociology droids, welcome back. We've been digging deep into Ian Mitroff's study of those Apollo moon scientists.
Really getting into those counter norms.
Yeah, like secrecy and the influence of reputation. It's like we're peeking behind the curtain of science and seeing that it's not always as objective and straightforward as we might think.
Definitely makes you question those classic norms we always hear about, like objectivity, universalism, all that.
Exactly. But I think that's the beauty of sociology of science, right? It helps us understand that science is ultimately a human endeavor with all its complexities and, well, messiness.
Totally. And Mitroff isn't trying to say that science is inherently flawed or that we should throw out those traditional norms altogether.
Right. It's more about recognizing that those counter norms, those unspoken rules and social dynamics are also part of the equation.
Yeah, they're not necessarily bad. They can actually be quite functional in certain contexts.
Like when you're dealing with those really big, messy scientific problems.
Ah, yes, the ill-defined problems like figuring out the origins of the moon.
The ones that spark heated debates and push scientists to their creative limits.
Exactly. Those are the problems where those counter norms like organized dogmatism and those tight-knit invisible colleges can actually drive progress.
Because you need that unwavering belief in your own ideas, that support from your intellectual tribe to keep going when the answers aren't so clear-cut.
Right. Those traditional norms of objectivity and universalism are still important, of course, but they might not be the dominant forces in those situations.
It's like the rules of the game change depending on what you're trying to discover.
Makes you think about those three scientists Mitroff highlighted, the ones who were known for being so stubborn, so committed to their own theories.
But also brilliant, right?
Absolutely. They needed that conviction, that almost dogmatic belief, to persevere through the setbacks and challenges of cutting-edge research.
And they were also deeply embedded in their invisible colleges, which probably reinforced their perspectives.
Right, which brings us back to the idea that social dynamics play a huge role in shaping scientific knowledge. It's not just about data and methodology.
It's about the people, their relationships, their ambitions, their biases.
Everything's a complex ecosystem.
And I think that's one of the most important takeaways from Mitroff's work. We need to have that sociological lens on the scientific process to understand that it's not this purely objective, detached pursuit of truth.
It's a human endeavor, shaped by social forces.
And that's something we, as sociology grad students, are uniquely equipped to analyze and understand.
We can bring that critical perspective to the table, help demystify the process of scientific discovery, and maybe even contribute to making it more inclusive and equitable along the way.
Exactly. So there you have it. Sociology droids. We've explored Mitroff's groundbreaking study of the Apollo moon scientists, uncovered those hidden dynamics at play within the scientific community, and hopefully challenged some of our own assumptions about how science really works.
It's been a fascinating journey into the sociology of science.
Remember, science is a human endeavor, full of complexities, contradictions, and those fascinating counternorms that shape the pursuit of knowledge.
Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep that sociological lens polished.
Until next time on Sociology Droids, keep those data engines running and your minds open to new perspectives.